Imagine the facility: concrete floors under fluorescent light, stainless tanks the size of pickup trucks, a conveyor belt moving empty jars past a filling nozzle at a rate of 140 units per minute. That is where your pizza sauce comes from, not a kitchen, not a garden. A processing plant, somewhere between Ohio and California, running on a schedule that does not pause for anyone's dinner. And according to Food and Drug Administration inspection records filed under the Freedom of Information Act and reviewed by independent consumer research organizations over the last 4 years, several pizza sauce production facilities supplying major American grocery brands have been cited for sanitation. Observations ranging from equipment maintenance failures to pest control deficiencies to handling practices that regulators describe as concerning. This is not the opening of a horror story. This is publicly available regulatory data. And tonight, we are going to pull back the curtain on the pizza sauce category, walk through the facility issues that have appeared in inspection filings, name the brand archetypes you are most likely to have in your pantry right now, and then give you the 15-minute solution that makes commercial pizza sauce largely unnecessary. Let us set the regulatory stage. The FDA conducts inspections of food processing facilities under the Food Safety Modernization Act, which became law in 2011 and expanded the agency's authority over preventive controls in food manufacturing. Inspections can be routine, triggered by consumer complaints, or follow up to earlier observations. The outcome is documented on a form called a 483, which lists observed deficiencies without necessarily indicating a violation of law, and the agency can escalate to warning letters or enforcement actions when observations accumulate. A 2020 analysis by a food safety publication reviewed several years of inspection records for facilities producing tomato-based products, including pizza sauce, and found recurring observation categories that included allergen cross-contact risks, metal detector calibration gaps, temperature control inconsistencies, and pest monitoring documentation failures. These are facility-level observations, not contamination confirmations in finished product, and the industry does generally catch and contain problems through hold procedures, recalls, and internal quality assurance before tainted inventory reaches consumers. But the system only works when the inspections happen, and the inspections only happen on a cycle that can stretch years between visits for facilities that have not recently had issues. Research suggests that tomato-based products, because of their high acid content and cooking process, are relatively resistant to most foodborne pathogens once properly processed. But mishandling during filling, sealing, or storage can still produce mold contamination, spoilage, organism growth, and in rare cases more serious hazards. Tonight we are focused on 8 brand archetypes where the regulatory trail or the consumer complaint record has raised flags worth paying attention to. Understanding the production environment matters because it shapes every brand on this list. Tomatoes arrive at processing facilities by the truckload during harvest, often ripening further in transit, and the plants run nearly continuously during peak season to convert incoming fresh tomatoes into paste, puree, or sauce before the fruit spoils. Workers stand on concrete floors, equipment runs hot, cleaning cycles happen between batches, but sometimes not between minor product changeovers, and the pace of the work leaves limited room for the kind of slow, iterative quality checking that a home cook performs by instinct. The resulting products are generally safe because pasteurization and high acid content protect against most pathogens, but the facility conditions under which the products were made are usually invisible to the consumer holding the finished jar. Environmental monitoring programs inside these facilities look for pathogens like listeria in non-product contact surfaces, for pest activity in storage and processing areas, and for allergen residues between product runs. When monitoring programs identify hits, the manufacturer is supposed to investigate, identify root causes, and adjust procedures, and the FDA expects documentation of these corrective actions during inspection. When the documentation is incomplete or when the corrective actions are slow to implement, the observations land in inspection records, and those records accumulate into patterns that tell you something about a facility's quality culture over time. The first brand is a classic red can of pizza sauce sold under a brand name that has been around for generations. The can itself has rarely changed. The facility producing it, however, has changed hands at least twice in the last decade as consolidation has rolled through the tomato processing industry. Each ownership transition potentially resets quality control baselines as new management integrates new systems. FDA inspection records for facilities producing products under this style of branding have noted, at various times, issues related to equipment cleaning schedules and environmental monitoring in the processing room. No product has been recalled based on these observations alone, but the cumulative picture, one of a production system operating closer to regulatory edges than many consumers would be comfortable with if they could see the floor. Even the name brand classic carries a sugar consideration worth naming. A single serving can deliver 3 to 5 grams of added sugar, which might seem modest until you account for cumulative exposure across multiple pizza meals per month combined with sugar from other sauces, dressings, and prepared foods in the modern American pantry. The American Heart Association recommends no more than 25 grams of added sugar per day for women and 36 grams for men, and the sum of hidden added sugars across the condiment aisle alone can exhaust that budget before the day's actual sweets are even considered. The second brand is a warehouse club bulk pizza sauce sold in large jugs for small restaurant and high-volume home cooks. The sourcing chain for this category is particularly opaque because private label contracts rotate between producers based on margin negotiations, and the jar you buy this quarter may come from a different plant than the jar you bought last quarter, even though the label has not changed. A state agriculture department inspection of a private label tomato products facility in 2020 reportedly documented concerns about pest monitoring documentation and maintenance scheduling, though the specific client brands sourced from that facility were not publicly identified. The third brand is a premium Italian-sounding label, designed with red, white, and green marketing cues to evoke Mediterranean authenticity. In many cases, the product is produced domestically in the United States, not in Italy, and the Italian styling is a marketing choice rather than a sourcing fact. The concerning evidence here is less about contamination and more about misleading provenance, but the underlying facility practices vary by producer, and some have appeared in inspection reports with observations regarding equipment maintenance. The third brand category also carries concerns about imported tomato paste, which can come from countries where pesticide residue regulations differ from American standards. Tomato paste is sometimes shipped as a commodity ingredient to finishing plants, where it is reconstituted with water, seasoned, and jarred. The country listed on the finished jar may be the country of finishing, not the country of origin for the tomato itself. And tracing the actual farm of origin through the intermediate steps is effectively impossible for a consumer armed only with the label. The fourth brand is a budget private label pizza sauce sold at deep discount grocers at prices that barely cover the cost of the tomatoes plus the jar plus the label. To hit that price point, something has to give, and in this category, what often gives is the intensity of quality control testing, the frequency of environmental monitoring in the plant, and the rigor of supplier vetting for the tomato paste itself. Imported tomato paste from countries with less stringent pesticide residue standards has been flagged in various years by customs and border inspection agencies, though specific brand attribution requires more transparency than the private label system typically offers. The budget category often contains sodium levels that exceed the more expensive alternatives on a per ounce basis, and high sodium is one of the primary levers budget manufacturers use to compensate for lower quality tomato inputs. Salt covers a multitude of sourcing sins, and a sauce that would taste flat on its own becomes acceptable when the sodium loads high enough to dominate the palate. The American Heart Association recommends no more than 2,300 milligrams of sodium per day for most adults, and budget pizza sauces can contribute 3 to 500 milligrams per quarter cup, which is a significant chunk of the daily total for a single ingredient in a single meal. The fifth brand is a pizza sauce marketed as organic and natural, sold at specialty grocery chains. Organic certification addresses pesticide and fertilizer practices in the field. It does not address facility sanitation in the processing plant. A product can carry a USDA organic seal and still be produced in a facility with inspection observations unrelated to organic compliance, and consumers who assume organic equals clean across every dimension may be extending the certification beyond what it actually guarantees. The organic category premium can be substantial, often 50 to 100% higher than conventional alternatives. And while the organic seal represents meaningful verification of certain growing practices, the sanitation gap between what organic certification covers and what facility inspections cover is real. Consumers paying the premium should understand what the premium and is not buying, because the marketing tends to blur those lines in ways that the certification itself does not intend. The sixth brand is a flavored pizza sauce, often with added ingredients like roasted garlic, fire-roasted red pepper, or infused herbs. The added ingredients introduce additional sourcing chains, additional allergen considerations, and additional opportunities for cross-contact in facilities that handle multiple product lines. Allergen cross-contact observations appear regularly in FDA inspection records for facilities running diverse product portfolios, and consumers with specific sensitivities should be particularly cautious about facility-shared product lines. The flavored sauce category also tends to be where small craft producers enter the market, and some of those producers operate in co-packing arrangements where their products are made alongside entirely unrelated products in facilities whose sanitation practices may not have been fully vetted by the craft brand's leadership. The craft positioning implies small batch care, but the actual production is often outsourced to co-packers running multiple clients simultaneously, and the quality control is only as strong as the co-packer's own systems. The seventh brand is a refrigerated pizza sauce sold in the prepared foods section, positioned as fresher than shelf-stable alternatives. The refrigerated format carries its own risk profile. Cold chain integrity from facility to warehouse to store to your kitchen depends on every link holding, and breaks in the chain can permit spoilage organism growth that would never occur in a properly heat-processed shelf-stable jar. Consumer complaints about refrigerated pizza sauce have historically included reports of early spoilage and off flavors that suggest temperature control failures somewhere between the plant and the purchase. There is an additional concern specific to refrigerated pizza sauce that food safety researchers have documented. Once opened, the product must be consumed within a narrow window, typically 7 to 10 days, and the consumer's refrigerator itself is a variable in the safety equation. Home refrigerators often run warmer than the recommended 40 degrees Fahrenheit, particularly in the door compartments where condiments are frequently stored, and temperature excursions in home storage can permit organism growth that would not have occurred at properly maintained commercial storage temperatures. The consumer absorbs a risk the packaging does not clearly communicate. The eighth brand is a pizza sauce sold in individual serving pouches, marketed for kid-friendly homemade pizza nights. The smaller packaging format requires more frequent seal integrity testing, and seal failures in multi-pouch packaging can lead to contamination that does not become visible until the product is opened. Inspection records for flexible packaging facilities have included observations related to seal testing frequency, though not necessarily finished product contamination confirmed in consumer possession. There is a broader pattern worth naming across these 8 categories. The tomato processing industry depends on a relatively short seasonal harvest window during which fresh tomatoes must be processed into paste, puree, or finished sauces before spoilage. That seasonal pressure creates throughput demands that stress quality control systems, and the volume required to meet year-round consumer demand means that even best-in-class facilities operate closer to their capacity limits than they might prefer. Industrial food production at scale involves compromises that home kitchens never have to make, and those compromises become the hidden cost that the retail price cannot fully capture. The Food Safety Modernization Act and the preventive controls rule that followed it have produced real improvements across the food manufacturing sector, and most facilities operate within regulatory expectations most of the time. But the exceptions are where this investigation lives, and the exceptions appear in inspection records with enough regularity that consumers deserve to know the category as a whole deserves more attention than the shelf pricing and marketing imagery would suggest. A jar of pizza sauce should be one of the simplest products in your pantry. The fact that it is not is a comment on the industrial food system as much as on any individual brand. Now, let us talk about what you can actually do. Pizza sauce is probably the easiest commercial pantry item to replace, with a homemade version that tastes better, costs less, and eliminates every facility concern this entire investigation raised. First, buy a can of crushed tomatoes or tomato puree from a brand you trust, ideally one sold in a glass jar or a can marked as BPA-free. Second, in a small saucepan, warm a tablespoon of olive oil and add to minced garlic cloves, letting them soften for 30 seconds without browning. Third, pour in roughly 2 cups of the crushed tomatoes, add a generous pinch of salt, a pinch of sugar to balance acidity if the tomatoes are tart, and a teaspoon each of dried oregano and dried basil. Fourth, simmer gently for 12 to 15 minutes, stirring occasionally until the sauce thickens to a consistency that clings to the back of a spoon. Fifth, taste and adjust, adding a pinch of red pepper flakes for heat, a splash of balsamic for depth, or fresh torn basil at the end for brightness. Sixth, let it cool, portion into small containers, and refrigerate up to a week or freeze in ice cube trays for single pizza portions you can pull out anytime. Seventh, if you want to invest 30 extra minutes for dramatically better flavor, roast a tray of fresh tomatoes at 400 degrees with olive oil and garlic until they blister, then crush them into a rustic sauce that no commercial product will ever match. Eighth, when you do buy commercial sauce for emergencies, choose brands with the shortest ingredient list, ideally just tomatoes, salt, and herbs, and verify the country of origin for tomato paste if that information is available on the label. There is also a canned tomato consideration that deserves mention in this context. Standard tin can linings have historically contained bisphenol, commonly known as BPA, and while many manufacturers have transitioned to BPA-free linings, the replacement chemistries are still being studied for long-term safety. Tomatoes are acidic enough that they can leach compounds from can linings more aggressively than lower acid foods, which is why glass packaging is often preferable for tomato products. When you do buy canned tomatoes, look for products labeled BPA-free and consider transferring leftovers to glass containers after opening rather than storing in the original can. The convenience of pre-made sauce also trades against a culinary cost that most consumers have not really considered. Homemade pizza sauce becomes a foundational skill that branches into marinara for pasta, base for soup, building block for braising, and partner for eggs. Learning one sauce technique unlocks dozens of downstream meals. The industry's version of sauce is a terminal product. The home version is a starting point. That difference, multiplied across a year of dinners, is not trivial. The bigger lesson is about where your food actually comes from. Most of us have never seen the inside of a food processing plant. We have seen the marketing version, the sunlit fields, the grandmother in the kitchen, the jar on the rustic wooden table. That version does not exist at the scale required to feed a continent. What exists is a network of industrial facilities running 24-hour shifts, regulated by an agency that visits each plant on a rotating schedule and staffed by workers doing their best under the margin pressures that retail consolidation has created. Most of the time, the system works. Sometimes it does not, and the inspection records tell us exactly when and where. You have the option, for almost nothing, to step outside that system for this one category of food and make something in 15 minutes that used to be ordinary before the jar became the default. The dough and the cheese and the toppings are all already coming from somewhere. Adding a homemade sauce to the equation does not make the pizza more complicated, it just changes the source of one variable in the equation from an industrial supplier to your own stove. That substitution, repeated across other pantry staples, is how home cooking rebuilds itself one small decision at a time, until suddenly the grocery list shrinks, the freezer fills with real food, and the family notices that the kitchen smells different now, better, the way it used to smell before convenience became the default. Pull a can from your pantry tonight. Look at the facility code if one is printed, read the ingredients, and then consider whether the 15 minutes it takes to make your own is worth knowing exactly what is in the pot. The 15 minutes it takes to make pizza sauce from scratch is also the 15 minutes in which you can teach a teenager the fundamentals of cooking, hand them a wooden spoon, and start the long project of food literacy that an entire generation of children has been denied by the convenience economy. The skill transfer that happens at a stove is worth more than any single meal it produces. That is the compound interest of real cooking, and it pays out for decades. For most of us, the answer is already obvious. We just needed someone to tell us we were allowed to cook again.